and often denied their husbands sex and food. Therefore, that put pressure on them. Women were therefore key in building confidence during the peace process. And confidence building is key in conflict resolution. Women, therefore, were very central in sensitizing the community on the need for peace and also participating in some of the dialogues. They were able to sing songs which were so touching. They had drama and skits which depicted the effect of war on them and how they suffered during this time of conflict. The youth also played the indigenous role during this conflict. Their role was the role of running errands and delivering messages to the fighters and elders. And usually such youth were not abducted or retained or killed by the rebels. They were always respected and looked at as messengers. And therefore, their energy was directed towards positive peace and conflict escalation. As a victim of armed conflict, the youth were key in working towards conflict resolution. In conclusion, therefore, indigenous norms and cultural practice could be key in armed conflict resolution. It provides a bottom-top approach in conflict resolution, which is cognizant of the country's wealth of culture and provides a local solution to conflicts of state dimension. The work argues that the adoption of the indigenous authority could provide a hybrid approach characterized by an inclusion in conflict resolution and sustainable peace in Africa as well as the individual states, providing a societal solution to societal problem could be achieved by the use of indigenous authority. Thank you so much. I thank you for your time for listening. I hand you back to the chair. Dr. Pamela, back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Agatha, for taking us, especially the indigenous, the aspect of indigenous authority and the need to sort of bring the two together as we seek to resolve conflicts in Africa. I think that is very fascinating. So, and also you really kept time. I didn't have to remind you, but you just commented on it. So that was really, really good. So I think we shall just proceed, Mr. Mayende. I don't know if Deborah showed up. Mr. Mayende might be busy. Did Deborah show up, Mr. Mayende?
I think Deborah is not here.
Okay, that is fine. If Deborah is not there, and then we have Claire Nakaziwe. But and I'm just wondering because Barak to Gloria, I don't see her logged on anywhere. Judith Charisima, I don't see any of this or even any kind of communication from them. But anyway, no problem. We should go ahead and listen to Claire's presentation. And if the others really don't show up, then that means that will leave us with a lot of time to reflect on the papers so far presented. So Claire is going to talk to us about...
There is also a hand up by Mubarak.
Tukur Mubarak, maybe you need to, so how does...
I will allow...
You need to allow him, yeah.
To speak?
Okay, so...
You can unmute. Mubarak, you can unmute and speak.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Hello. Hello, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, but good morning, actually. Barak.
Morning.
Okay, so
Yes,
hello.
I'm sorry for my late coming. So I have to travel to another. Yeah, I travel to another state to get connected because of the current
Oh,
war in the northern part of the country. So that's why I'm
oh,
late. Yes,
oh,
virtually open network. But, so now I have come to Kano this morning to get network.
oh, sorry about that, but we are glad that you've been able to join us finally. So you will have 15 minutes to talk to us about insurgency, forced displacement, and women peace building in northern Nigeria, 2010 to 2020. And you, from your sharing,
Okay.
you're already telling us about the impact of this insurgents in the country. So it will be really, we really look forward to listening to your presentation. So over to you, and you have 15 minutes. Thank you. Mbarak. Mbarak.
He was switching
Can you hear me?
over.
Yes.
We don't hear
Can you hear
him.
me? Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Hello. Hello.
Go ahead.
Hello. Okay. The paper is on insurgency and
Mubaraka can put the video on because this session is recorded live.
the crisis violence has caused over 2 million people homeless, in which women and children suffered a terribly in the hands of these violent
Mbarak.
every part
Mbarak. Mbarak.
Hello. I can hear you.
Are you able to put on your video just
Yes,
for
I can
even
hear
if
you.
for a little bit? Are you able to put on your video?
Okay.
Because this is live streaming, yeah. Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Okay, go ahead.
So the crisis of Boko Haram started in 2009. But prior to 2009, there are other conflicts with the organization known as Boko Haram. And the name Boko Haram was not their original name. Their original name is Jama'atu Ahli Sunnah Bid-Da'wati wal Jihad. So these are people propagating for the establishment of the Sunnah of the Prophet. But their approach against anything Western, that people will tell them, these people are Boko Haram. Boko means Western education. That is Boko. That is the actual meaning of Boko in the native language of Hausa. Then Haram is something that is not accepted. So, and this crisis started when the leader of this second was killed. I can say it's traditionally killed by the Nigerian security forces. And that shaped violence, radical.
But can you just adjust your camera a little
This
bit?
paper is trying to. Okay, the camera.
Yeah, so that we see you. You're way too up.
Like this? Okay.
Okay, maybe that is better. Okay.
So the paper is trying to explore the agony life of displaced women and the contribution made by some women to builders in peace in the region. This issue of Boko Haram is nothing but an act of terrorism. When they started by religious misconception, religious misinterpretation, and interpolation of the religious state. Because what they started first was asking their members on all this and start attacking any person identified as embracing the West. Have attacked so many schools, they have so many students, as well as attacking the universe. So by this, some scholars who were scholars of Islam think that this thing is not Islam. So they start preaching around retaliates by eliminating. They start also eliminate any political leader that also goes against their teachings. They start forcing penalties of youth, women, and girls to be in their camps. Then they start forcing marriage and among their commanders. What they do is that they come to their house. They know that you have some mature girls. They will come, take them, and drop like 5,000 naira as dowry. That okay, you have seen that you have children, you have girls, and you cannot marry them off. Take this money, we are going to marry them. So then they took into the bush. By doing this strategy, then everyone becomes silent. Everyone becomes so fearful. So now nobody talks. Then at a certain time, even the director of the media house was saying, like, quoting, that even if something happened in front of this media house regarding the issue of Boko Haram, we are not going to promote it. So now the challenge is for women, because the women were the major victims of Boko Haram, apart from the because from 2010 to 2011, up to 2013, what the Boko Haram did was massive kidnapping of young girls in hundreds. This led people to start leaving their communities by coming down the city. By this, the implication of the refugee crisis have now crossed over to neighboring countries like Nigeria, like Cameroon, and some part of Chad Republic, because the heartbeat and center of the Boko Haram crisis was in a place called the northeastern part of Nigeria, and that's northeastern part of northeastern part of the country bordered with three countries, most especially like Borno, it bordered with Chad, bordered with Cameroon, it bordered with the Republic. A kind of trading activities from Borno up to Sudan. That is the long distance. But notwithstanding, we are not discussing about that. Here, the implication of the terrorist activities have rendered millions of people in their own lives, while others moved down to the Republic and sought for the refuge. With this, bear in mind some strong women. These strong women, their voices was not harsh, but they say, no, this thing cannot continue like this. We have to speak to that. There is one lady called Hafsatu Alabi. This strong lady, she was also formerly known as Mama Boko Haram. Because of the trust the terrorist group had against her, she became an intermediary between the government and the Boko Haram terrorists. So we made an appointment to go and transfer them and punish them. In fact, even when they enough, the children at Setu Alamin was at the forefront of one important aspect to people should understand. Whenever there is war, we an extrajudicial killing from the security personnel. The terrain cannot identify who are terrorists. So what they start doing is start arrests, and by the time they arrest, the parent will not see you again. So this has also compounded the issue, which have such an said this cannot continue. She told me that she raised her father, her bathroom first, she covered her head, and she started moving to the bush where she was and have a discussion with them regarding issues of peace in that area. One important aspect is that this woman, in the first place, she was never acknowledged, despite the effort she was making to bring peace in that area. He told me at the time he was arrested by the security, saying that she is giving support to the current group, which was not true. So when these issues were happening, I was also opportunity to have a discussion with another woman peace builder called Hasana Waziri. Hasana Waziri was also a strong builder in the society of that area, because what she told me that by the time people are having so much fear about certain groups, many of them troop into a degree term. What they started doing was that she mobilized her fellow women to see how they can accommodate this women. They said, once they left their houses and came down to the city, some of these women were accommodating at the gates of so many people in the town. We engaged in providing them food, clothes, and other living materials, which would at least push the hardship they were experiencing. Another woman is Aisha. This Aisha, she was a prominent peace builder in issues regarding dialogue. What she told me, they engaged, apart from issues of peace and insurgents, they have also another crisis within their local communities, the issue of terrorism. Some of these youths who were involved in this terrorism were invited, rehabilitated, and become full citizens. That they even swore to them that they will never engage or be back into criminality. So the main issue here is the crisis of Boko Haram in the northeastern part of Nigeria have shown that despite the population is still women engage in playing a such an important historic group and the government. But still, the government was not seeing this kind of effort made by this woman. I think that's the discussion of my paper. Thank you very much. Hello?
Hello.
Hello?
Yes, Mubarak. Hello.
Yeah, I think that's the end of the paper. Yes,
Hello.
that is the end of the paper.
Okay. Thank you very much. The network interruption really did not allow us to follow you very well, but I could tell that you're capturing some interesting experiences of women
It's almost
in the
cut off
event of
because of the current fight.
Sorry?
The government has cut off now.
Yeah, I think, yeah, so the network was not
Yes.
very good. We couldn't follow some of the bits, but I could tell that you've talked to women and they've shared their experiences. So I hope that during the Q&A we can be able to talk a little bit more about that. Thank you very much for the paper. And I think we will now go to listening to Elizabeth. Not Elizabeth, sorry, Claire. Elizabeth presented already, but we shall now go on to listen to Claire, just because, as I said, some of the participants haven't joined us. I don't see Judith, I don't see Gloria. So I would like to invite Nakaziwe. Claire, are you there?
Yes, I'm here,
Okay.
please. Thank you.
Great, I see that you're sharing your screen. Okay, over to you, please.
Okay. Well, I'll apologize first because the place where I'm seated, there are some renovations going on, but I'll just go through as they do their work in the background, if you don't mind, members.
Okay, it's okay.
Okay. Well, my paper was on migration governance policy and its impact on the socio-economic livelihoods of refugees, internally displaced persons, and the host communities. To define migration governance, migration governance refers to the law and policy affecting the movement of people. It includes policy on travel, temporary mobility, migration, immigration, nationality, labor markets, economic and social empowerment, as well as social development. Well, what caught my attention to do research on this was the fact that there were some conflicts occurring. There are some conflicts occurring between the immigrants, that is refugees, and host communities. And this was evident in many parts of northern Uganda, where they received refugees from South Sudan, and then the border of Uganda and Congo, and then some parts that border Uganda and Burundi. So I was like, let me try and do research on this and see really what's causing a problem. Why can the host communities live harmoniously with people? And why are the refugees in Uganda referred to as intruders who are intruding on people's land and taking people's cattle and property and competing for the few resources that are available? So for the introduction bit, I am referring to intermediary cities. These are the secondary cities, the cities that before hosting refugees were really rural, but they are transforming into modern cities just because of the influx of the refugees. And these are the secondary cities. You can either call them the secondary cities or African intermediary cities, just because they are transforming from being typically rural to advancing, like trying to advance economically because of the influx. Because wherever you see a lot of people carrying out activities, economic activities, social activities, such a place really transforms from being traditionally rural to gaining some kind of urban formation. So to introduce, African intermediary cities are at the forefront of receiving and safeguarding refugees and immigrants. And because of this, they have become very significant in matters concerning migration governance. Countries in Africa and Uganda, to be specific, are affected by different types of migration, and the most common being conflict-related migration. As you all well know, doctors and members, the most common cause of migration in sub-Saharan Africa is conflict, because of the political instabilities in the countries neighboring us, the countries surrounding Uganda, and the countries surrounding other refugee hosting countries are conflicts. So due to this, there has been a recent large influx of refugees in Uganda. And for internal displacement, it has been as a result of in-country ethnic wars. The current conflicts in South Sudan, Somalia, and the Tigray region of Ethiopia have greatly contributed to the increase of the number of migrants and refugees in the Horn of Africa. My research questions were typically three. To narrow them down, there were three main research questions. And the first one was, how do the current migration policies affect migrants and the host communities? Like I previously said, this is what triggered my attention to this subject in an effort to see an amicable living between migrants and the host communities. So I tried to figure out in this research question how the current migration policies affect migrants and the host communities. And then question two was, what are the factors that encourage or motivate local authorities to engage on questions of migration and displacement? Because you can't host, like how I'm focusing on the intermediary cities, the secondary cities. There's no way you can integrate refugees into the host communities without working with the local governments. So what is the interest of the local governments? How motivated are they? What is encouraging them to engage on questions of migration and displacement? Are they aware? Do they know why these people are here? Do they know how to meet, do they know how to sensitize the communities to harmoniously live with these people? Because not all of them will live in camps. During this research, I actually found out that more than 50% of the refugees that come in don't necessarily live in camps. They live within the community. They integrate with the people in the local communities. So how are the local leaders, how are the local administrators, how are the local authorities trying to, to what extent are they interested in engaging on questions of migration and displacement? Then question three was, what are the factors that hinder local authorities from engaging on questions of migration and displacement? Because I found out many of these local authorities are shunning away from these issues. They actually don't have, for instance, in Kiangwali refugee settlement, the surrounding communities and the local leaders there actually don't want anything to do with any question that tackles migration and displacement. So what are those factors that hinder them from being interested in such issues? Because it's a problem, or it's a factor that is happening, it's an occurrence, and we've got to harmoniously live with it, and we've got to tackle the challenges that come along with it. But why are the local leaders not interested in the subject itself? Well, there were many study findings besides that, but given the issue of time, I'll go straight to the proposed strategies and policy proposals. At the end of this paper on conducting the research and the study and everything, I came up with the strategies and policy proposals for the amicable living of displaced persons and migrants and refugees in the host communities, for peace to be there, for peace to prevail. Because the main focus of my research was to ensure harmonious living, to come up with policies that can ensure harmonious living, and strategies upon which the local leaders can prepare the communities to host these people and avoid conflicts. Because, for instance, in northern Uganda, the border of Uganda and Sudan, there are issues of conflict where many of them come in with their arms, where many of them have been mentally disturbed and they can't live harmoniously with the community. So I was like, what can be done for peace to prevail? What can be done for conflicts to be minimized and ensure harmonious living between the host communities and the refugees themselves? So to go straight to the proposed strategies, I analyzed my findings and came up with the following points. Point one, there is need to develop local strategies or solutions to address urban migration and displacement, which has over the years been a great challenge, especially in Uganda. There is an urgent need to recognize that mixed migration can contribute both to social and economic development of the host communities, because many of the local leaders saw immigrants or migrants or refugees as a challenge. They see them more as more of a problem than an opportunity. So if the communities and the local leaders can be sensitized about how they can fully make use of these people and ensure that they add to the social and economic well-being of the community, then they can be viewed from a different perspective. So there is an urgent need to embrace mixed migration and see how social and economic development can occur in the host communities as a result of the immigrants, migrants, and refugees that come in. So there is collaboration that needs to take place and partnerships between the central government and the local government, and then international actors, for instance, the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, civil society organizations, community-based organizations, the local governments. There is need for them to partner in order to work for the same cause if change is to be seen, if change is to prevail, if conflicts are to be resolved, if peace is to prevail, and if harmonious living is to occur. There is need for partnerships and cooperation between all these. They need to work together for the same cause. And then, since the study intended to bring together different actors from different levels of governance, there's need for them to develop ideas for equal partnerships, like I've just previously said, for urban migration governance, with the potential of losing the gaps between the international strategies and the local realities. There is a big gap, actually it's loosening. They need to close, they need to curb the gap between international strategies and the local realities. International actors need to come to the grassroots and work hand in hand with the local governments and the central government in order to ensure harmonious living and close the gap. Because what I identified on the ground is that international actors are working, they're actually doing their own work on the other hand, and the local governments are also doing their own work, and the central government is also trying to implement something else. So there is nothing like coordination in some, not in all, but in some refugee settlements and some host communities. They are not working together for the same cause. Despite the fact that they have the same goals, there is lack of coordination. So there is need for integration in order to achieve the set objectives. Are we together, Pamela? Can you hear me, please?
Very well, I hear you loud and clear.
Okay, thank you. I'm glad my network is good today. Well, to go ahead, my last slide is still on the proposed strategies and policy proposals. African intermediary cities they have of recent become very significant actors in matters concerning migration governance. This cannot go unmentioned. Despite the fact that we have what we call the top-down approach in matters concerning refugee policy implementation, people at the grassroots are not really involved in the decision-making. So we need to apply a bottom-up approach for a bottom-up approach of policy implementation in order to see or to achieve the set results. So what I'm trying to say is that these secondary cities are at the center of receiving refugees. They are at the center of receiving immigrants. They are at the center of receiving migrants. So they need to be catered for first. They need to be the #1 priority before policies come from the central government from the office of the prime minister to the grassroots. They need to be set from the grassroots, then up, because these people know better than people working under the central government. So if a policy came from, let me say, a local government official or a CBO organization working in Kyangwali refugee settlement, or a civil society organization working at the border of Uganda and Burundi, probably at a city in a place bordering Uganda and Congo, those policies can be more effective than policies set from up and then try to be imposed on people down. And then sensitization of the people, the host communities, because these are the people, the local people are the ones that are going to live with the immigrants and refugees. So they need to be involved in the policy-making process so that decisions can be well received and implementation can be eased. Local governments in the global south ought to integrate themselves in development and implementation of good migration governance policies. We need to integrate as countries in the global south. Yes, Uganda has a problem and it has been applauded as one of the countries that are very receptive when it comes to refugees and with very good governance, migration governance policies, though that when it comes to the implementation stage, it's something different. But being applauded is not the issue. It's all about integrating Uganda with other countries that host refugees within the region. And the Global South, for instance, countries, actually in the Global South, we need to work together as countries. Uganda partnering with Kenya, Uganda partnering with Zimbabwe, Uganda partnering with South Africa in order to come up with policies that can cut across and that can really be commendable, that can really solve the issue of conflict and peace and insecurity actually in order to achieve peace. And then lastly, the engagement of all stakeholders when it comes to rights-based migration. Despite being a refugee or an immigrant in Uganda, you have your rights as a person, a human being. You have your human rights, you have your rights as a person. Being a refugee doesn't make you less of a person. So human rights and rights-based migration governance policies need to be applied. And during this application, all stakeholders need to be involved. Such stakeholders may include the private sector, civil society organizations, community-based organizations, and the academia. For instance, Gulu University, because it's closer to the border with Sudan, and other academia, Makerere University, and other universities, private universities as well, Utamu, so as to ensure utmost awareness. Because what I saw as an issue here is making the host communities aware of the presence of refugees, understand why they are there, and live harmoniously with them. This calls for sensitization and education of the local communities. Well, those were my findings and the proposed strategies. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Claire, for the presentation. Very interesting work there. And I really like that you take us through proposed strategies as well. So it seems to me that the rest of the panelists really will not be able to join us. And we have, okay, so we missed out on three other people, but this is okay. We've had interesting papers. And what we are going to do now is we have about we have about 30 minutes, maybe 33, maybe. Yeah, I think we have slightly more. I have about 40 minutes almost ourselves. So we really have some time.
Hello, Pamela.
Hello? Yes.
I see Deborah in attendees. Is this Deborah Birungi the same person?
No, she's Deborah
Sarah and Mark Ivan Kaiso. But
okay.
I wonder.
Yes, Deborah Birungi, not. Yeah, okay, then no problem.
But are you able to get to her to confirm whether she's the person? Because here she is supposed to be with, she's Deborah. Actually, here she signed as Deborah Sarah. So.
Hello, Pamela.
Hello.
I actually know Deborah Sarah, but I tried to reach her some time back. She wasn't picking her phone. I guess she's in a meeting.
Oh,
but her name is
okay.
Deborah Sarah Nakirija.
Nakirija, okay, yeah, I see
Yes.
Nakirija name here. Okay.
Yes, please.
Okay. All right, then it's a shame then that we've missed on her presentation, but that is fine. It gives us some good time to reflect on the papers shared here. I think we have about the whole 35 minutes. I'll just, like I suggested, if people have any comments, they can come through the chat. And what is there so far is a conversation between Corey and Agatha. It's not really specific questions. So maybe I'll open it up for discussion for people who have any questions. I have some questions myself about some of the presentations. So maybe as we wait for any questions to come up, I can take advantage of my chair, take advantage of my chair and ask some questions. And I think my first question will go to Katsime. Elizabeth. Hello? Elizabeth Katsime.
Yes, I'm there, doctor.
Okay, great, thank you. So so this notion of history repeats itself. And the context in which you're using it, I would like you to throw more light so that it doesn't seem as though things that happened yesterday will happen today and will happen in the future because history repeats itself. You know, in the context of the civil military relations in Uganda, can you help us just put a finger on some of those points where we actually see history repeating itself? That was my question. And another one exactly very, very closely relating to that was I wanted you to try to
Hello, I think I've lost you. Cannot hear you. Hello?
Doctor, we cannot hear her.
I cannot hear you too. I've lost doctor. Can you hear me?
Yes, I think Elizabeth.
Hello? Hello?
We can hear you, Elizabeth. I think we lost Dr. Pamela, but we can hear you,
We've
Elizabeth.
lost Dr. Pamela.
Yes.
Yeah.
We
Yeah,
can
I
hear you,
think,
Elizabeth. Agatha is the one talking, but we could hear Elizabeth. It's only Dr. Pamela we've lost.
do you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Yeah, my network dropped. Sorry about that. So I was asking Elizabeth, yes, that if you can just help pinpoint for us those points in the civil military relations, and if you can help us understand exactly what you mean by the civil military relations. Lastly, I saw you pointed, in terms of practical, in very practical ways, what we can gain by listening in and perhaps reading your paper. But I was also a bit curious on the point of what is the academic take home of studying the civil military relations. Thank you. I would invite that if the rest of the members on the panel have questions for any of the presentations, you are welcome to ask those questions. But for now, I think I'll give you Elizabeth audience so that you can respond.
thank you so much, Dr. Pamela. Maybe to begin with the last, what is the academic take home for the civil military relations, or for this paper presentation I've made? To me, I want to believe that the academic take home, it is having a historical reflection of civil military relations in Uganda and using that knowledge to inform the current political context. And another point, you say that I should point a finger on civil military relations that I'm talking about. I highlighted the events of civil military relations, more especially the the civil military relation that surrounds the general elections from 1963 to the most recent. So the finger would be, what is the relation between the state and the armed forces and the civilians in terms of the general elections? What do we take from the past, for example, from 1963, 2016, 2021? What relations that have been happening that are maybe repeating in the similar way? And what could be the causes that we can learn from them, and what effects and maybe what can be able to avoid? Then I think another question, if I got you well, was what is it that civil military relations is? Maybe to define it plainly without talking into the debates about it. It's the relationship between the state and the civilians and the armed forces. It's that kind of coordination and relationship that's happened in between that I'm trying to talk about. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Elizabeth, for your response. I think when you pick out, for example, the example of the elections, I think that might make more, it can come in more meaningful to me, because then I can easily pick up those moments when there've been elections and try to ask in which context, how the state and the military related with the everyday persons, and then try to trace the ways in which history might have repeated or not even repeated itself. Because yes, history, at least as a historian, yes, there can be moments of history repeating itself, but it's not necessarily that it's always repeating itself. There can be very key differences or key points of departure. So I would take note of that as well. And so thank you for the responses. I had a comment too for Dr. Lidre and Agatha. Are we together? Before I ask.
Yes, doctor, I'm following you.
Okay. So I mean, your presentation was really interesting. Just how you're trying to make sense of the place and functionality of indigenous authority. But what was missing for me, of course, now this was just a 15 minutes. In a 15 minutes presentation again, we don't expect you to give us all the details. And so for me, in as much as I appreciated the time you took to explain, to define for us indigeneity and all that, I was kind of left wanting more. I wanted to know exactly what is the context of the conflict that you're talking about, the UNRF2 and the Ugandan government. Of course, you know that very well, but some of the people listening in might not actually be able to make sense of this conflict. And so I would have wanted to hear a little bit more, like just in terms of fleshing out and contextualizing the conflict. And then the other thing that I really wanted to hear a little bit more is, what is the specific indigenous authority that, or even authorities that was or were applied in this case? Because if we just talk about indigenous authority, it is like indigenous authority, but what is it exactly amongst the people that, or the communities that you studied? What exactly is this indigenous authority? Are there even names for it? If there are mechanisms, if there are local mechanisms of conflict resolution, do they have any local terms? Or do we just take it as something that is generic, especially if we just use the terms indigenous authority. So I wanted to hear a little bit more about, those community or that community, to imagine myself in that community and to say, yes, this is how they were doing it. And these are the specific things or specific aspects of indigenous authority that actually play a role in trying to resolve conflicts in this area. Of course, you did mention, for example, the role of women, and I was particularly struck by the fact that, if I got you correctly, that if any of the fighters, for lack of a better word, got into a house and found there was a woman, they would be restrained from fighting. I want you to help us unpack that a little bit. And in a conflict where, of course, you have two warring parties. So I was just wondering, which man will not go back to fight if they enter a house and find a woman? Are those the men from within that community? Are those the army, maybe on the part of government? So again, the context there wasn't clear to me. So I left kind of wanting to hear more, a bit of context on the conflict, but also exactly what these women are able to do and who they are able to do it with. Thank you, Agatha. I'll be happy to listen to your response.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Kanakwa. Yeah, I appreciate your kind thoughts and your comments towards this presentation. I would like to begin by responding to your first question. What is the context of the conflict? Yeah, I know I left a lot out there. This was a conflict between the former Idi Amin soldiers, former Uganda Army soldiers, and the NRM government. And therefore, it was a military conflict, an armed conflict, a state society conflict. And this conflict witnessed many options taken in its resolution. There was the military option, which witnessed the escalation of the conflict, and the conflict was going out of hand. And therefore, the elders, the ethnic society, the community had to come up and use their traditional authority, use their traditional position to resolve the conflict. And in this situation, indigenous authority was also stratified. There was the cultural institution leaders authority. They played a role in engaging government into resolving the conflict using negotiation, settling the conflict in a peaceful way. And then we also have the fighters, the combatants who are also fighting, and the same elders had to intervene, talk to them, using the indigenous authority, their status, to talk to these fighters. And who were the fighters? These were sons of the land, the Lugara, fighting, the discontented group who are fighting. And they had alleged that the government had abandoned them. There was lack of development. They had not been recruited in the army, so they felt neglected and marginalized. So the elders also spoke to them. Now, apart from that, we also have the political, what we call the political elders. These were elders who didn't have the indigenous authority, but they had the political influence. They spoke on behalf of the people when linking up with the state. But culturally, they didn't have that authority. And therefore, they were a bridge between the state and the cultural institution. And women also had their authority. This authority was based on their status and social position as mothers, as wives. So a woman had her authority as a wife. An elderly woman had her authority as a mother, a grandmother, and especially being an elderly woman, she was respected as mother of the clan. So she too had her authority as a mother, and therefore could also dictate upon the fighters who were from her family. And how will she do that? She'll threaten to pass a curse upon them. And because of that psychological fear of curses, the boys, the sons, usually laid down their tools. And the younger married women had their authority as wives because they had the responsibility of taking care of such a man, meeting his marital needs, and where the men were not laying down their arms, such a woman will deny him sex, will use her position, will use her authority as a wife to act. Most often, they will even pick the arms and return them to the LCs on behalf of their husband as a means of really making the man to stop participating in armed conflict. And therefore, those were how the authority were stratified. And when you looked at the hierarchy, women came down to the middle and lower hierarchy. But all the same, they played a very significant role. Some of them threatened to leave, abandon the marriage, leave the children and go back to their home. And as a result of that, their husbands had to come back home and abandon fighting. And you raised the question of what struck you most in this presentation. The situation where a fighter will enter a house and fall by the side of a woman. In this situation, a woman will not allow such a man to be killed because it was culturally a bad omen. And when fights were taking place, a man or somebody runs into a woman's hut, it will mean she has to ensure his safety. Reason being that when blood is spilled, when a stranger's blood is spilled on your compound, in your house, that becomes a bad omen. And as a result, women felt it was their responsibility to protect the family by protecting such persons. And as a result, they will end up handing over such a person to the authority. And the kind of law which will be implemented upon such an combatant will be the legal laws, and he will not be killed. Now the question, another question was, which man will not fight? Who were the fighters? The fighters were the local men fighting the army, the government army. But there was one thing, the government soldiers were more strict. And when they got hold of the indigenous people, they will torture them, they will kill them. While on the other hand, the local fighters, I will call them rebels, were very careful because they knew the implication of culture and custom on them. And as a result, even when they came back, reconciliatory ceremonies had to be undertaken, even up to the extent when some of them wanted to marry from certain clans and where they were implicated in having participated in causing havoc or killings in that particular family before the marriage was settled, they had to reconcile, perform certain rituals or ceremony of reconciliation. And that was based on the traditional, the indigenous practices which were inherited through generations. Thank you very much, Dr. Kanakwa. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Agatha. That is very, very informative. And this indeed is an interesting study. It reminds me of the role of women, the role of women in the wars in South Africa earlier in the 20th century, the Anglo-Boer wars and stuff, and how women challenged the men to actually go out and fight. And so it is interesting that in this case, it's kind of the other way, how they're challenging the men to promote peace and not war. But also just the fact that you have, so you have the men from this region who understand the culture and what it means. But on the other side also you have maybe the army and other people who do not understand the local culture. I think it creates some kind of tension there. And to me, then it seems that this indigenous means become a kind of space through which the men from the communities, it kind of seeks to control the actions of the men from within the community, because they understand the culture, they know what they should not do. But what does it do then for the soldiers who don't know about the culture? I'm not asking you to answer this, but it is something you could reflect on, that the mechanisms seem to I mean, in a way you could say that it sort of limits the people from within the community, and those from outside who don't know the culture could still go ahead. And so at the end of the day, whose interests does this mechanism serve? To what extent are the locals protected, or is it just silencing them so that the power from above can continue to dominate? But that is just one of the things that struck me. Thank you very much. It's very interesting. Okay, so I don't really have questions, but I thought, I don't know, I had a problem with Baraka's presentation because of the poor network. I don't know if the rest of the panelists were able to follow in very well what Baraka was saying. And so because of that, I'll just be a little bit curious. Barak, if you don't mind, if you could just say something about the ways in which the women are seeking to build peace amidst the Boko Haram violence and torture that they go through. What kind of strategies have these women developed, and to what extent would you say the strategies are either effective or not? Mbarak, if you're still with us, I would appreciate your thoughts
Pamela.
on that. Yes.
Excuse me, Pamela.
Yes, please.
Thank you, Doctor.
Please, we can inform. There's a person in attendees called Rosemary Nakajuba. Is actually the presenter
Hello?
of another
The
parallel session.
strategies.
So you can just
Yes.
let her know. She can move over to the other session, make her presentation.
Okay, so how do I do that, Mr. Mayende? Because I had sent a message and I've just realized that I sent the message to.
She has had.
No, I think I sent it to just, she has had, okay. Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Okay, thank you very much. Okay. So Mbarak.
Hello?
Yes.
Hello? Yes?
Hello.
Yeah.
We hear you.
The essence, the strategy like was born out of necessity. The team of and approach the government that military actions is not the solution fighting the insurgents. So these women, they facilitated a worldwide campaign that touches all continents in this globe against the use of kidnapped children, especially girls, by the terrorist group. At the same time, these women become mediators with the government and the terrorists. That's why I made mention that one of them, like Professor Alame, she used to leave these terrorists on several occasions to highlight them the true meaning of religion. To tell them that religious Islamic religion did not teach violence and radical extremism. And this has really worked. Another important issue which I didn't mention before, that some of them female suicide members are such. Alamin told me that this girl can become a suicide. One of the states, she was married off as a jihadi bride to any of. So what they did to her, they will tie a bomb belt to her, dephonetize her, and drove her a strategic place where she can bomb herself and kill the targeted people that were expected to be killed or to be bombed. So this woman told me that they have taken many of these girls. They have taken many of them. They make them come back to their senses. That is it. Another one piece of that she was telling me that the indiscriminate killing of youth who were conceived as terrorists caused some of them to challenge the military actions. That we are going to help you fish out the criminals. That's why we have the emergence of CGTF, that is Civilian Joint Task Force from 2014, 15 up to 2020. And this Civilian Joint Task Force is still operating. There are people extracted from the civilian, from the public, who were more competent with the locals, and they know this radical youth that were engaged in these terrorist activities. So the civilian ATF have in also building within the northeastern part of the country. She is also Aisha. She's a Boko Haram country. In fact, I don't know that woman. I just saw her on Al Jazeera, interviewed her about the activities she was doing as fighting the activities of terrorism in that part of the country. Then I became curious to go and find how this woman was engaging her life in those activities.
Mbarak.
I met her at her hometown. Hello? Hello?
Oh, yes, Mbarak. The
So
network is so bad.
Hello, doctor.
Yes, the network is so bad. We can hardly hear you.
Yeah, actually, we're probably in this part of northern part of the country.
No, I can.
Currently, there is war between the bandits and the government.
Oh.
So that's why the government is decided to cut off all telecommunications. So we have to move to other states to get this network. And even in those states, the network was very low because they cut off the network and entered the bush to fight this. That's why they did. Thank you, Dr.
Okay, sorry about that. I hope you stay safe, but we really look forward to reading that chapter. Seems to be having very interesting stuff, so we'll be looking forward to that. I think so Claire, I think it will be very unfair for me not to say something about Claire's paper. Very simple, Claire. So I wonder how Uganda's migration policy or migration governance policy relates with what goes on in other countries. Like in terms of the region, why is Uganda seen as the sort of destination for refugees? Of course, I would want you to comment a little bit about the most recent controversial refugees coming to the country and all the jokes about the Taliban and all that. I'm sure you saw that in social media, and how they are trying to fit within within the Ugandan societies. Yeah. So I would want you to say something. Is it because it seems to me that there's a tension somewhere in your presentation. We seem to have a policy that is welcoming to refugees, but at the same time, there seems to be then some tensions between refugees and the host communities. So how do we, I don't know if I got you well, but I would want you to comment on that. And then maybe one other thing, what is this, the expectation from some of us who are not very knowledgeable in the field is that there are designated refugee points or refugee camps or whatever they are. But then we have also the refugees integrating with the host communities. So could you please help us understand that? Could you help us, for example, understand why there are many Congolese women selling bracelets, necklaces, jewelry, basically, within Kampala, and somebody else would say, but I thought refugees are supposed to be in some refugee camp somewhere else. How do you help us appreciate that? Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Pamela. I appreciate your question. Well, when it comes to the first remark you made about Uganda's migration policy, well, Uganda is uploaded around the world, and that is well known. That is because refugees can come in, they have access to education, they have rights to acquire land through the proper channels. Unlike refugees in other countries, the policies are really, the good policies are really there, but that doesn't rule out the fact that there are some challenges that lie underneath the good policies that are seen on top of the table. Underneath the table, there are some challenges that come along with the policies that need to be put right. Okay. And when it comes to your second remark about Congolese women who are supposed to be in refugee camps, being on the streets of Uganda, selling stuff and everything, others married to the locals, there are several, the way I would respond to that is that there are several ways a person enters a country, and the same applies to Ugandans entering other countries. Like going abroad, some declare as refugees, some don't. So there are very many avenues through which people enter Uganda, and some don't declare themselves refugees. They come through different ports of entry, some formal, some other routes that are not formally set for people to enter the country. So probably those women enter through those ports, and they don't declare themselves as refugees, because at the border point, when you declare yourself as a refugee, whether you like it or not, you'll have to end up in a camp. But if they don't declare, maybe some come in as business women, others come in as people who are visiting relatives, others are students, others are, different reasons for them visiting Uganda, for them coming into Uganda, and then they just end up on the streets. And then what I identified during the study, I identified that there are some people who escape from camps. That's very unbelievable, but it's true and it's happening. When I try to compare with my research, my research findings with the findings of from some other research done from other developed countries, for instance, in the Netherlands, there was a book I read. I'll post details here and messages later, where some African people go to those countries, declare as refugees, but as they are put in camps, they try by all means to exit the camps, whether legally or through other means, whether they're breaking the law or not, but it's evident. If it can happen there, why not here? So people exit camps in all ways. They find ways of exiting and they end up settling in the host communities. And then we had an issue where, well, this is sad to say, but I think I have to mention because I did this study and I have to tell the findings. There have been occurrences of some Ugandan businessmen going into Rwanda. Should I call it trade of human beings or human trafficking or something of a sort? And then they acquire girls, they get girls from Rwanda and then bring them into Uganda and then sell them off to men to marry them. That is very common. And this being the East African community, you can't ask someone why there is a free movement of people within the East African community. So there are these men who deal in that trade, men and women, actually, business people. They go into countries. I gave an example of Rwanda, but it's happening in other countries elsewhere, not only Rwanda, where people go into countries, they bring in girls, and then they sell them to men to marry. So if marriage probably goes wrong, these are the people who end up on the streets, or if the marriage is still going on well, these are the people who settle in host communities. They get married, they give birth to children, they invite their relatives. So refugees settling in host communities cannot, it's evident, it's everywhere. It cannot go unmentioned. There are even more in the host communities than those in the refugee camps. So I guess your question is answered, Dr. Pamela. That's my submission. Thank you.
Yes, it is. It's very interesting, very fascinating study there. I also know from one of my students who's doing work on refugees that there are those who actually register in the camps, live in the communities. But when it comes to time that you have some things being given to the refugees, for those who are registered, they go and collect their shares and they go back to the community. And I think this just shows how porous the whole situation is. In terms, first of all, you talk about the borders being porous, so people can come in different ways. But even the boundaries of the camps within the refugee camps within the country are also porous in a way that you can have people be able to move back and forth. So this has been a very, very interesting panel. And unless anybody really has a question, I can see that we've overshot by about 3 minutes. I would like to bring this to a close, unless our host, Mr. Maende, guides otherwise. Mr. Maende, are you with us? Mr. Maende?
Did you call my name?
Yes, I'm calling your name. I think for us, we are good to go. We have had our interesting presentations and discussions, and we've come to a conclusion.
Okay.
Yeah, it's very nice, panelists, having all of you on board. Thank you very much, and look forward to reading your papers when they come through.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
Meeting.
Okay, bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Doctor, for